At 2:17 a.m., Alina Vacher's laptop did not freeze, crash, or stutter. The screen went black with intention, the kind of darkness that feels deliberate, as if someone on the other side had decided it was finished letting her look. For a brief second, the dark glass reflected her face. Pale. Still. Her eyes carried that unmistakable expression people have when curiosity quietly turns into trespass, and trespass suddenly becomes something that cannot be undone. The apartment was silent in a way that felt wrong. No traffic noise. No pipes in the walls. No distant television sounds. Just her breathing, shallow and uneven, as if her body had begun conserving oxygen on its own. Then text appeared. Not typed. Not animated. Placed. You've been watching the wrong people. The cursor blinked once. Then again. And then the lights went out. Not gradually. Not with a flicker. Off. The desk lamp clicked uselessly beneath her fingers. The refrigerator's hum died mid-cycle, leaving behind a silence so sudden it felt staged. Outside, somewhere close enough to matter, a car alarm chirped once and then stopped instantly. Alina didn't move. Her hands hovered above the keyboard, fingers locked in place, heart slamming hard enough to make her dizzy. This wasn't panic yet. Panic comes from confusion. This was recognition, because spread across her desk were printed documents she had never planned to print. Papers she had touched without thinking, now lying openly in the room like evidence at a crime scene. Internal memoranda stamped with restricted classifications. Surveillance logs bearing agency codes that didn't officially exist. Medical intake forms with patient identifiers left intact. Photographs taken through windows. Not paparazzi shots. Not accidents. Clean angles. Calculated distances. Every page captured something private that had never been offered. And every reference number, every crosslink, every internal shorthand led back to the same name. Governor Merrick Halvorsen, the most powerful political figure in the state. A man whose public image was built on moderation, transparency, and the promise that he represented a clean break from a corrupt past. The screen went black again. And this time, it stayed that way. Just hours earlier, before the darkness, before the message, before the quiet certainty that her life had split into a permanent before and after, Alina had been standing in her kitchen staring at a pot of boiling water. Instant noodles. She was debating whether adding an egg made it a real meal or just a more convincing lie. She was 26 years old, an investigative journalist at a regional outlet most people ignored until something broke badly enough to demand attention. Corruption. Abuse. Sudden resignations followed by explanations that never quite answered the right questions. Her apartment was small and drafty. Not messy, but crowded with thought. Stacks of notebooks filled with half-built timelines. Flash drives without labels. Old phones stripped of SIM cards. A corkboard on the wall tangled with red string. She kept promising herself she'd reorganize once the story was finished. There was always a story. Her phone buzzed. Unknown sender. No greeting. No explanation. Just a notification that a file had been received. Her stomach tightened immediately. Anonymous tips were normal, but this wasn't Signal. It wasn't Proton Mail. It wasn't routed through any of the channels people used when they were afraid. The file name was meaningless. A string of characters. No extension. No context. Her first instinct was to delete it. Her second instinct was stronger. She pulled the spare laptop from the bottom drawer of her desk, the one that had never touched Wi-Fi, the one she kept for moments when her intuition stopped whispering and started insisting. That instinct would cost her everything. The file didn't open. It expanded. Directories spilled across the screen like a map of a hidden city. Hundreds, then thousands of folders, nested with unsettling precision. Dates, names, locations, internal tags. Leverage, pressure, compliance, neutralization. Her pulse quickened. She opened one folder at random. An audio file began playing instantly. A state senator's voice. Unfiltered. Panicked. Begging someone off record not to release something that would destroy his career. A transcription scrolled beneath the audio, filled with annotations, timestamps, and cross-references to financial data and private communications. Another folder contained private emails between a judge and a corporate donor. Another held medical scans belonging to a major political contributor. Another showed photographs of an activist asleep in her apartment, taken from a neighboring building at an angle that suggested planning. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't opposition research. This was infrastructure, a system. And then Alina saw the folder with her own name. She stared at it longer than she wanted to admit. When she clicked it, her hands felt cold. Inside were photographs of her entering and leaving her building. Screenshots of social media drafts she had never posted. Location pings from nights she was certain she had left her phone at home. There was a partial transcript of a therapy session she'd attended months earlier. She hadn't known the platform stored raw audio backups. Someone else clearly had. At the bottom was an analysis. Her income, her debts, her isolation, her ambition. A conclusion. Subject demonstrates elevated persistence, moderate social insulation, high tolerance for risk, susceptible to compliance under sustained psychological pressure. Alina leaned back slowly. This wasn't monitoring. It was preparation. Her phone buzzed again. Check the timestamps. She did. The most recent files had been updated less than an hour earlier. The system wasn't dormant. It was live. Whoever had sent this wasn't leaking old secrets. They were inside the machine. Right now. And for the first time since she became a journalist, Alina felt something colder than fear. She felt chosen. The moment Alina understood that the system was live, her sense of time began to fracture. Minutes stopped feeling like minutes. They stretched, folded, disappeared. Every sound in her apartment felt amplified. Every vibration of her phone carried the weight of intention. Even silence no longer felt neutral. Silence felt like a decision someone else had made. She shut the spare laptop and disconnected the battery with shaking hands. For the first time, she didn't want more information. She wanted distance. She packed quickly, not neatly. Printed documents went into her backpack without order. Flash drives were swept from the desk into her coat pockets. She didn't bother locking the door when she left, because some part of her already knew that locks were symbolic at best. The city outside looked the same. That terrified her. People walked dogs. A couple argued quietly at a bus stop. Someone laughed too loudly near a cafe entrance. The normalcy felt rehearsed, like a set built to convince her nothing had changed. But everything had. She took 3 buses instead of 1, doubling back, watching reflections in windows, counting how many times the same car appeared behind her. It might have been coincidence. It also might not have been. By the time she reached a friend's apartment on the other side of the city, her hands were numb from gripping her phone too tightly. She didn't explain why she needed to stay. She didn't trust herself to explain anything out loud. That night, she barely slept. Her phone buzzed just before dawn. A new message. We can talk. No threats. No demands. Just confidence. That was worse. Within hours, the pressure became more organized. Emails arrived from unfamiliar law firms, written in neutral, polished language, warning her about potential defamation exposure if she published unverified material. None of them mentioned Governor Halvorsen by name, but every sentence seemed carefully designed to remind her who could afford to wait her out. Opinion articles began appearing online, criticizing what they called reckless journalism and data sensationalism. The pieces were vague, almost generic, but they appeared across multiple outlets within the same 12-hour window. It wasn't outrage. It was alignment. More unsettling were the personal messages. A former editor texting to ask if she was doing okay. An old professor leaving a voicemail suggesting she take some time away from the story. A source she trusted canceling a meeting without explanation. The story hadn't broken, but the containment had. Alina moved again. Then again. Couches. Spare rooms. Apartments belonging to people who asked no questions, or asked too many but accepted silence as an answer. She rotated burner phones every few days, then every few hours. She stopped charging devices overnight, convinced that even the act of sleeping made her predictable. She began noticing patterns. The same news anchor repeating the same phrasing across different networks. The same talking points echoing through unrelated articles. Subtle changes in how the governor was described. less powerful, more embattled, less accountability, more concern. Language was shifting, and language always shifted before reality did. She reached out to the only person she thought might understand the system well enough to explain it. Tomas Kirill, a former cybersecurity architect for the state's Digital Infrastructure Initiative. He had been quietly dismissed 2 years earlier under the polite language of restructuring. No scandal, no farewell interviews, just absence. When Tomas finally agreed to meet, he chose the location, the time, and the conditions. No phones, no watches, no small talk. When Alina showed him the files, he didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "How long have you had this?" he asked. When she told him, he nodded slowly. "They didn't just collect data," Tomas said. "They modeled behavior." He explained the system patiently, methodically, like someone describing a machine he once helped build and now regretted understanding so well. Data pipelines disguised as security audits. Updates that quietly expanded access. Algorithms trained not to identify crimes, but leverage. Debt. Infidelity. Medical vulnerability. Grief. Anything that could be applied with pressure and released without leaving fingerprints. "This isn't surveillance," Tomas said. "It's governance. Influence without exposure." He showed her internal projections, scenarios that mapped out how individuals would respond under different types of pressure. Politicians voting against their own platforms. Judges recusing themselves without explanation. Activists burning out and withdrawing quietly. No scandals, just obedience. Then Tomas found something that made him stop scrolling. A contingency protocol buried deep in the architecture, isolated from normal operations. "If exposure risk exceeds tolerance," he read slowly, "initiate reputational neutralization." The subfolders open like a script already written. Anonymous tips prepared for editors. Financial irregularities constructed from real data points. Deepfake videos rendered but unreleased, waiting for authorization. Alina's name was already there. Not as a possibility, as a placeholder. Someone had planned for her. This wasn't reaction. It was anticipation. They understood then that publishing once would not be enough. If they released the story in one place, it would be buried. If they released it slowly, it would be reframed. They needed simultaneity. Multiple outlets. Multiple countries. Legal redundancy built into the release itself. Encrypted drops programmed to trigger automatically if certain devices stopped checking in. If one failed, the others would still fire. Time became something they borrowed rather than owned. Then the anonymous source contacted Alina again. This time, it wasn't text. It was a video. The face was obscured. The voice flattened and synthetic. "I didn't choose you randomly," the voice said. "I chose you because you don't stop. And because if this fails, it ends with me." Alina asked the only question that mattered. "Who are you?" The video cut to a still image. A badge. The governor's private security division. The implication was unmistakable. The system had leaked itself. And once that door opened, there was no closing it again. The release didn't feel dramatic. There was no countdown, no announcement, no sense of triumph. One moment the files were sealed inside encrypted folders spread across continents, and the next they simply existed everywhere at once. Published in different languages. Hosted on servers governed by incompatible laws. Reported by journalists who had agreed on only one thing. No single outlet would own the story. That was the point. The first reactions were confusion and denial. Official statements dismissed the reports as mischaracterizations and dangerous speculation. Spokespeople emphasized national security, digital threats, the importance of stability. For several hours, the governor's name wasn't mentioned at all. Then the logs were cited. Not summarized. Quoted. Exact phrasing. Exact timestamps. Internal terminology that had never appeared in public documents before. The denial phase collapsed quietly. Markets reacted before politicians did. A major donor froze contributions. 2 senior aides resigned without explanation. A scheduled press conference was canceled less than 10 minutes before it was supposed to begin. By evening, protests had formed outside the state capitol. Not massive crowds, but determined ones. People holding printed screenshots. QR codes linking to mirrored archives, handwritten signs that asked questions instead of making accusations. Governor Merrick Halvorson appeared on television that night. He looked composed, offended, calm in the practiced way of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for scrutiny. He spoke about coordinated attacks, about destabilization, about irresponsible journalism threatening public trust. For almost 20 minutes, he never addressed the substance of the allegations. Then a reporter asked about the contingency protocol. Not generally, by name. There was a pause, less than a second, but it was enough. 2 hours later, federal agents entered the governor's office. The images circulated instantly. Not dramatic footage, just doors opening, boxes being carried out, phones pressed to ears. By morning, officials confirmed that the surveillance system had been temporarily disabled pending review. That phrasing mattered. Temporarily. By night, Tomas Kirill was gone. No message, no call, no explanation. His apartment was empty when Alina checked. Not abandoned. Cleared. Personal items removed with professional efficiency. It looked less like someone had left and more like someone had been erased. The investigation unfolded slowly, deliberately, in the way investigations involving power always do. Committees were formed. Hearings were announced. Language softened. Terms like illegal surveillance were replaced with data governance concerns. Blackmail became undue influence. Accountability became process. Governor Halvorson resigned 3 weeks later for health reasons. No charges were filed. The system was declared dismantled. Life moved on. Alina did not celebrate. She watched the news cycle shift, the outrage fade, the story become a reference point instead of a crisis. She noticed how quickly the conversation turned toward lessons learned, best practices, and forward-looking reforms. No one asked where Tomas had gone. No one asked who else had been involved. The most disturbing part wasn't what had happened. It was what hadn't. The contingency protocol had never been activated. The reputational neutralization sequence designed for her had remained untouched, which meant one thing. The system had never considered her a terminal threat, only a variable. Months later, a final message arrived on a burner phone she had already planned to destroy. No greeting, no explanation, just a set of coordinates. She stared at them for a long time. Then she turned the phone off. She didn't go, because she finally understood something that had taken far too long to accept. She hadn't destroyed the machine. She had forced it to adapt. The people who built it hadn't disappeared. They had learned. They had refined their language. They had updated their safeguards. They had removed the parts that were too visible, too crude, too easy to trace. Somewhere, behind newer firewalls and quieter offices, a revised system was already running, watching different patterns, tracking different behaviors, waiting for the next anomaly. And the most dangerous truth wasn't that the surveillance had existed. It was that it no longer needed to look like surveillance at all. Alina had never been the observer. She had been the test. And now the system knew exactly how much truth the world could tolerate. There was no official conclusion, no final report that named everyone involved, no moment where the full architecture was laid out for the public to see. Instead, the story slowly hardened into something abstract, something people referenced without revisiting. A case study, a warning, a footnote. Alina noticed how often her name appeared without her voice attached to it. Quoted in articles she hadn't been interviewed for. Cited in panels she wasn't invited to attend. Reduced to a symbol instead of a person who still woke up every morning expecting the knock on the door that never came. That, too, felt deliberate. She understood then that the system didn't erase people anymore. It diluted them. It allowed the truth to exist, but only in fragments, only in ways that could never fully reassemble themselves into something dangerous. The information remained available, technically accessible, but emotionally distant. Too complex, too exhausting. Most people didn't look away because they were controlled. They looked away because they were tired. And that realization settled in slowly, with a weight she couldn't shake. The future wouldn't be defined by secrets kept in the dark. It would be shaped by truths revealed so carefully, so partially, that no one felt compelled to act on them. Alina closed her laptop, not because she felt safe, but because she finally understood the rules of the world she was living in. Exposure wasn't the end. It was just another variable. And somewhere, in a system she would never see again, her file was no longer marked active. It was marked complete.